now going to be joined from Cairo by the Iranian Affairs specialized writer Amr Ahmed, who's joining us here on Qnews. Thanks very much for being there with us. So what makes this second round of talks in Rome different from the previous talks in Muscat?
Greetings to you, Mark. We can say that the negotiations already started today in Rome. What we have followed up in Muscat, I consider preparatory meetings, but today the negotiations are starting officially. Iran can consider them good negotiations, but they fear that the United States of America might increase the terms of negotiations away from the nuclear program, and Iran wants to go forward with the negotiations, and they want them to succeed. Also, the United States want to conclude an agreement that will prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Iran does not want to own a nuclear bomb, as well as the United States rejecting the Iranian position of a nuclear bomb. But these negotiations here for Iran is considered under the supervision of the United States and the European Union. There are pressures from the US side, as well as the International Agency for Nuclear Energy, and we have seen a visit from Bruce Lee to Tehran, and that was not welcomed by Iran. Iran sees that Iran wonders why is the agency interfering now, and why does it want to impose a European agenda on the negotiations. What has been stated by Iranian officials from Rome, that Belusi will not be taking part in these negotiations, and these negotiations will go in an indirect way, which is preferred by Iran. Iran does not want a direct negotiation, so that the United States cannot affect the dire economic situation in Iran.
Well, let me ask you about that actually. Of course, in Oman, there was a brief moment where Arakchi and the envoy Steve Witkoff from Washington did have a brief direct conversation. Is there any chance that these indirect talks may eventually turn into direct talks?
I don't think that's gonna happen in this time or in this round. Specifically, what happened is in Muscat, as I pointed out, that was indirect negotiations. Yes, on the sidelines of these talks, last Saturday in Oman, there was a small meeting between Steve Witkoff and the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and what has been published in the Iranian official media, that the negotiations are taking place in two separate meeting rooms, meaning that the Iranian delegation is meeting with the Armenian foreign affairs ministers, and the United States representative is meeting with the Armenian minister, without any direct link between the two sides. Any direct negotiations for the United States might expedite the negotiation process, but as I have indicated before, Iran is completely rejecting such direct negotiations, and this might change. At first, Iran rejected for the negotiations to be held in Rome, and here we are. And holding the negotiations in Oman, because there was a history of confidence between Iran and Oman regarding the negotiation processes since the Iranian-Iraqi war in that ended in 1988, and ever since Sultan Qaboos assumed office in 1970, there was a cooperation and between Iran and Oman, and this was the most quiet relations and a safe zone for Iran to hold the negotiations there.
Okay, and one of the things that Iran is asking for is a guarantee that the US won't exit any future deal. Of course, the last deal that Iran had with Western powers under Obama's leadership was torn up by Trump in his first term. How realistic is it that Iran might get a guarantee that the US won't exit any future deal?
Let's speak frankly, there are no guarantees from the United States. The US president issues one decision and then the other day he speaks about a different thing entirely. And consequently, there are no guarantees. Iran wants guarantees, of course, but the only guarantee here for Iran in these negotiations is the Russian pressures or a point of contact from Russia in the negotiations. And you're aware that in line with these negotiations, there are other talks regarding the Ukrainian war. So Iran is relying on the Russian role in maintaining this agreement and to pressure the United States, but Iran is taking precautions regarding these negotiations, and Iran does not expect for things to go very easily and in a streamlined way. Even the statements today by the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, he said that how long these negotiations will take will depend on the flexibility of the United States. So if if these negotiations takes longer, it means that the United States are not flexible enough.
And of course, there are political pressures in both countries, Iran and the United States. How might those domestic political pressures shape negotiating stances? Of course, there are people in the United States who would like Trump to be more hawkish towards Iran, and there were differing views in Iran as well. How important are these political pressures?
This is a very good question, Mark. The yesterday's statements by the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, he promised the world that there will be no agreement under the domestic pressures in Iran. And you indicated the domestic local pressures practiced on the United States president, external and internal, from Israel and otherwise. But in Iran also there is the conservative trend pressuring the negotiations, and they do not want the relations to go back as before with the United States. And some Iranian newspapers talked about the extreme perspective rejecting any agreement with the United States, and due to the casualties that Iran has already bore, some are make benefits after these sanctions, and the conservative trend and some internal institutions in Iran are actually benefiting from the current situation. But the Iranian president promised that he will not give up or give in to any internal pressures of this kind, and they will conclude an agreement satisfactory to all parties inside and outside.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Qnews, Amr Ahmed, who is an Iranian affairs expert and a specialized writer as well. Thank you very much.